Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Perry Davis. I'm from Training and Technical Assistance Services at Western Kentucky University. As Ms. Rich indicated in her opening remarks, that the federal government will be coming back to this organization during the third week of February to do a follow-up to ensure that the issues that were identified in the monitoring review have been all corrected. And she also provided you with the situation in terms of the ramifications of not ensuring that the information was corrected properly. So this afternoon, what we're going to do is there were two really primary areas that was identified in the finding that we are going to address in this seminar this afternoon. The primary area is the situation with cost allocation having to do with documenting activities in multiple programs. The PowerPoint that we put together this afternoon is a proposal of some of the things that we want to share with all of you as you move forward in terms of making sure that when you have multiple cost objectives, programs, then that you're documenting the activities in the program based on the actual after-the-fact activities. So the information will be made available once we finalize the sample procedures as well as the report that we're proposing to provide to you this afternoon. As I said, the other area was the area of non-federal share. We're currently working with a group of staff throughout the city in terms of some of the delegate agencies on putting together a system that will systemically allow for the non-federal share to be consistent with the approved amount of match that was put into the application to ensure that it meets all the federal regulations. So we have a committee that's working on that diligently and should have something out very soon in the spring of the year. So this afternoon, though, I want to take a few minutes to actually address the situation with the documenting the time when you work in multiple projects. If my memory serves me correctly, about 60% of the findings that were identified in the monitoring had to do with after-the-fact activity reports. In fact, in one situation, the after-fact activity reports in terms of working in different projects even included the non-federal share. So this is something that the city and Ms. Rich felt was necessary because we want to make sure that in moving forward that we don't have these issues that will keep coming up in the future. So right now, Victor, I can't see. Okay. Okay.
I have a question. What were the dates?
Well, the return to this person.
Like stage fright. Trying to get it. Okay. This afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be looking at a system that we're proposing for the tracking of the compensation as it related to the working in multiple programs. As you know, most of you have funding through the city to operate Head Start programs, early Head Start programs, child care programs that are not all under the same quote-unquote program in terms of they're all different programs. The federal standards require that if you have such situations in place, that you be able to clearly demonstrate that when you provide for those services, that every program or project pays its fair share of the cost. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use as a prop this afternoon. Something ain't working here. I guess it's going to change. Just hit it, hit enter, yeah. Hit it, return the picture. Hit the next slide, go. You should hit enter, and you won't go down. Okay.
The arrow okay?
No, the arrows, I don't, he has control of it.
There you go.
Okay, okay. As one of the things that all of you are probably aware of is that whenever you're dealing with federal funds, there's a massive number of regulations out there that are associated with those federal funds. And so the area of compensation is no exception. Clearly, in order to compensate people properly, and which you should, the federal government expects that each program set up a system that provides reasonable assurance that the program that receives the services pays their fair share of the services and no more than that. So what we did this afternoon, we took some regulations, and these regulations come directly from the cost principles for government agencies. And the primary regulation that talks about why we have to move in this direction of having personnel activity reports deals with the term allocable cost. Allocable cost, according to the regulations, is the cost of the goods and services that need to be charged to a particular cost objective based on the benefit received. And that's simply saying, in a nutshell, in layman terms, that's just saying that if Head Start receives the services, Head Start pays for the services. If Child Care receives the services, then Child Care pays for the services. So what you have to do is to be able to capture the cost of those services on reports after the fact. Now, I know many of you have what they call cost allocation plans. The cost allocation plan is the actual plan in order to get to the point of documenting the cost in each one of the programs. So if we have a cost allocation plan, that doesn't necessarily mean that if we allocate the cost of a person's salary 50% Head Start to 50% Child Care, that doesn't mean that as they begin to perform those functions in those programs, that at the end of the period in which the services are being provided, that service will be 50-50. We want to know actually how much of the time that individual has actually spent in each one of the programs, which then supports the compensation of that salary for that particular employee in that program. So we want to make sure that that's part of the process. Okay. Now, in order to do so, as we originally started off, the regulations require that there be some kind of report, mainly what they call a personnel activity report, to document staff time when they are working in multiple cost objectives. Now, as you can see on the screen, we took from 2 CFR Part 225, Appendix B8H5, the actual regulations that require us to document activities in multiple programs. So the standards say clearly here that you must have an activity report or equivalent documentation that meets the standards that's listed on the screen. One of the standards, the first standards in Section A of that section talks about they must reflect after the fact distribution of activities of each employee. And as I said earlier, the cost allocation plan only sets us up to begin to do that. The cost allocation plan is developed. We put the cost allocation plan in place, and then as people work in different programs, at the end of whatever period they're required to record their time, then they record their time in each one of the programs. So that gives us the after-the-fact distribution of the actual activities in each one of the programs, each one of the projects that each employee has worked in. They must account for the total activities which employees are compensated, and that's absolutely true. In other words, we cannot, because of funding constraints in one program, charge a cost to another program. It has to be strictly based on the employees working in that particular program and the amount of compensation required by that program for that employee. One of the standards require that they be prepared at least on a monthly basis and that they coincide with one or more pay periods, simply saying that the activity report can be prepared monthly, but it has to coincide with the payrolls that occur during that month. So if you only have one payroll during that month, then it's going to be 1. If you have more than 1 payroll, then it will coincide with whatever payrolls that are identified during that month. Now, the last one here says that they must be signed by the employee, and that's absolutely correct. The employee must sign the personnel activity reports, which supports that they did work in those programs. Now, some of your cost principles, and again, I want to remind you that this is only the cost principles for state and local government agencies. There are cost principles for nonprofits, there are cost principles for colleges and universities, and there are cost principles for hospitals, of which some of you may fall in those categories. Each of those will require a signature. Some may require a signature on the part of both the employee and the supervisor. Now, the federal regulations, though, as part of the monitoring process, when they come out to check activity reports as part of that process, they expect that the employee signs the activity report reflecting the after-the-fact activities, and that the supervisor with first-hand knowledge also signs that activity report. So right now, I'm not sure how each of your systems are set up for signing the activity reports or timesheets, but it should be signed by the supervisor as well as the employee in the program to make sure that the supervisor is ensuring that they have first-hand knowledge of the activities. Okay. So to say all that, we over the last few days have been looking at this issue because, again, as I said in the opening session of the training, that there were about maybe 60% of the findings had something to do with a personnel activity report. So what we've done here is we have created a draft, and it will come out as a draft, and perhaps all of you could modify it according to your program to capture the after-the-fact activities in each of your programs or projects. If you have more than one program, I guess what I'm saying is, if you operate more than Head Start, you operate Head Start, Early Head Start, and Child Care, then you would, and you have employees working across those programs, then certainly you would need to have those employees to record their time after the fact in each one of those programs or projects. But this is a sample. Now, the way we'll handle this is because the Fair Labor Standards Act, Fair Labor Standards laws do require certain responsibilities for what we call salaried or professional employees versus non-salaried or non-professional employees. Now, on the part of the non-professional employee or the non-salaried employee, the time must be recorded in hours. So when you're using the activity report, you have to show the number of hours that non-salaried or non-professional employee has worked in each one of those cost objectives. And of course, we're aware, we probably already know the reason for that, because if you're a non-salaried or non-professional employee, you're subject to the Fair Labor Standards Act, which means that if you work over the required hours during that particular week, that you must compensate that employee at time and a half. Now, the activity report here can be structured to capture the actual hours for a non-salaried employee. Now, the report is also designed to capture the hours or the percentage of time of the salaried employee who works in multiple projects. So we know that all of us who are salaried employees, that it doesn't matter whether we work 6 hours a day, we work 10 hours a day, we work 12 hours a day, our salary is going to be what our salary is. So the activity report that we're proposing here allows for that salaried or professional employee to capture their time either way you choose. If you choose to use hours, that's fine, but you can also use the option of percentages of time worked in each program or project. Now, if you notice this particular document or form that we're talking about, it doesn't give a lot of detail. It provides for the time period. It gives you the beginning date and the ending date, and that's just simply saying if you do it once a month, it'll have the beginning date and it'll have the ending date, and it'll also account for the amount of time that each of the employees spend in each program during that period. You may use it on a weekly basis, or you may use it on a bi-weekly basis, or you may use it twice a month. That's strictly the, at the discretion of the program. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about, support documentation in just a few minutes, because certainly with something like this, if you're ever monitored by someone, they may question the fact that how did you know that that employee did work that amount of time when all it's showing is a percentage of time in each program versus, and as well as the number of hours if that's the case. So we'll have to do something else, and we'll propose something else a little bit later, and we'll see that in just a few minutes. Now, there's a statement on here that says, I've certified to the best of my knowledge that this is an after-the-fact determination of my actual activities in each cost objective for the period. And that's important. The employee will sign that as well as the supervisor. And so essentially what they're saying is that we've provided that we're reasonably sure that that particular employee has worked in each one of those programs for cost objectives during the period in which you captured the time or the percentage of time on this activity report. So you want to make sure that when we sign this, both the employee and the supervisor, that we have that kind of assurance that this employee has done that work. And also, if you notice down here, at the very bottom, it says that the supervisor having firsthand knowledge of the activities performed by the employees. That means that the supervisor also, because the supervisor is like the verification or the certification that that employee has worked in that particular program or project during the time that's recorded on this activity report. In order to get us there, Victor, I need to see that word file. Okay. We are proposing that, because again, as we said a few minutes ago, this is more of a report reflecting at the end of the period in which the compensation is going to be paid based on each cost objective or program. But we're also providing an opportunity for you to consider looking at what we call a daily log. Now we have we're trying to put it on screen. We drafted a daily log of how a employee could actually record their time in each one of the cost objectives on the job description. We're going to get it in okay. But anyway, the log that we're proposing will have the code. It'll be lined up with the job description, and we're proposing that, based on your job description, that you develop job descriptions based on the actual activities the employees work in each program. And based on that job description, it will easily number those activities, say, for example, in Head Start and Early Head Start and Child Care. And then this activity log here that we will be hopefully seeing in just a few minutes will allow for you to match those activities on the job description to a list of activities on the, it'll only show numbers, for example, and he's just about to get here. It will show the numbers based on the numbers on the job description. So if the first task on your job description on the Head Start is HS1, then the activity log will have HS1. And based on that particular date that you worked on that particular activity, you'll simply record your time, the number of hours in that particular category. And at the end of the period, it will allow for you to accumulate the hours among all programs, so at that particular point, you can transfer that time to the activity report as the source of the compensation for that particular job that you perform. So we're proposing this as something that you can use to support the personnel activity report, because the personnel activity report, as you saw a few minutes ago, Victor, you can probably just go back to this PowerPoint. A few minutes ago, it does not provide for a lot of specific detail. If you're ever monitored perhaps by the federal government, by Wage and Hour, or whoever comes to your organization to monitor you, and they begin to ask questions about how did you come up with these percentages in each one of these programs and projects, then the activity report log would certainly be one of the sources to support you in terms of having something to indicate that your actual, that no one just sit down and actually just put in these hours or these percentages, that they did actually have something that the employee used to track their time daily, weekly, or whatever period to support what's on that personnel activity report. Okay, now those of you who are from, working with the Head Start program, okay, just go back, can we go over to the PowerPoint? Those of you who are working with the Head Start program know that there are a number of Head Start regulations out there. Oh, we finally got it up. This is just a sample of the activity report, and if you notice, stop right there. You notice in the far left-hand corner you can see the activities. You see a section for activities, and all we did was we're proposing that the activities on the job description coincide with the activities here. In the first column we have Head Start activities, and then we have a total all the way down here, which will give us the total number of hours or percentages, and then we have early Head Start and child care. So you will have to, if you're going to look at using something of this nature, certainly you would have to look at your job description and make sure that you identify all the activities in each one of the programs so that you can line it up with this particular report in terms of so when employees work throughout the course of the period, that they can simply record their time on a daily basis to coincide with the activities in each program. Now, again, this is not something that would be mandatory. It's just a tool just to make sure that when if questions are asked about the personnel activity reports, because it is such a comprehensive document in terms of consolidation, that you do have something to show that based on the activities performed in each program that they've worked those programs, that they've worked in those programs. So I want to now move back to the PowerPoint, and I want to talk a little bit about some other requirements that we need to do. As I was saying before, the activity log was placed on the screen. Those of you who are in the Head Start program know that Head Start has hundreds and hundreds of regulations, and in order to meet these regulations, the Head Start program, I need to warn after that, warn up a little bit. The Head Start program, in almost every case, requires that we develop a set of policies and procedures. And so what we want to make sure here happens is that because we are converting or we are moving to another system, which will allow for us to track the activities after the fact in each program or project that the employee is working, that we don't do it in a manner that does not allow for answers to questions. And in the Head Start program, the way we answer questions is that we actually develop policies and procedures. And so what we've done here is we've drafted a set of policies and procedures that support the documentation of staff compensation or their time in multiple programs or projects. The slide that's on the screen now is simply a slide that shows a policy that we are proposing that you may want to take at your organizations and draft or center or structure the way you will be tracking these activities so that you'll have a systematic way so that the employees know that they are supposed to record their time based on after-the-fact activities in each program or project. And this is the policy, and we'll have a set of procedures that we'll go through in a minute that we're proposing that you may also want to consider. So we know we're going to have to do personnel activity reports or equivalent if there is a situation where we have multiple programs going. In this example, Head Start, Early Head Start, and Child Care, and we have employees or we have resources that are being shared among those programs. If we do have employees, then the activity report is going to be necessary because the activity report will substantiate the work that they performed in each one of those programs or projects. And so what we did here, we actually designed and put together some procedures that you would do. The expectation here in the very first procedure is that all the employees record either electronically or manually the time that they actually come in to start their work. So when they come into the program, every employee either they clock in or they sign in or whatever system you have in place, but there is a system in place that indicated that they are there to start that particular day. Now, the next thing here is the actual work. Now, so since we're talking about employees who are working on multiple cost objectives or programs, then certainly we want to make sure that that employee, when they come to that site and they start working, that program that they are programs, because it could be a situation when they come in, they could be actually working in multiple programs. We'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute. But the employee began to know that they whatever activity they're doing, that they're doing it for that program or program. So you want to make sure that there is something to record a log. Now, we're not saying that you have to record the log every minute of the day that the employee is working in those programs. But we do highly recommend that at a minimum, that they record it at the end of each day. So, for example, if I spent my time working at Head Start on the Head Start activities 3 hours a day, and I spent time working on early Head Start activities 3 hours during the course of the day, and I spent two hours of my time working on child care activities during that course of the day, that I showed on my log, which we gave you a sample, but you may have your own, that's perfectly okay, that at the end of the day, that employee worked 3 hours in Head Start, 3 hours in early Head Start, and 2 hours in child care. It's important because the expectation is that each one of the programs only pay their fair share of the cost in which they benefited from. So you want to make absolutely sure that you have something, because at the end of the period, I don't know if the period is going to be a weekly pay period, or it's going to be a 2-week pay period, or it's going to be twice a month, or it's going to be once a month. You then must convert that actual time during the course of each one of those days to a cumulative total and include that on the activity report, which will be the basis for that particular employee or employees to be compensated. Now, I did indicate a few minutes ago that some activities may be shared among programs. For example, if I'm in the fiscal department and I'm doing payroll, and I'm doing payroll for everybody, I'm not just doing payroll for Head Start or early Head Start, I'm doing payroll for all 3 programs or projects, then the effective way to record that time would be looking at the payroll based on the actual cost allocation plan itself. So what I would do at that particular time is, if I did payroll and that consisted of all 3 of my programs, and I had a cost allocation plan that says part of the, when I do have those activities, the allocation is going to be 40% Head Start, 40% early Head Start, and 20% child care. Then since I'm doing all 3 of those, and that's what the cost allocation plan said I would do, then I will record those applicable percentages in each one of the programs and projects. So you want to make sure that the daily activity log or the activity log that you're going to implement allows for specifically when I'm working in a specific program as a standalone, how much time that I'm working that program, as well as if I'm working on all 3 programs or 2 programs, whichever number you may have, that's going to be supported by the actual activities consistent with the percentage of time in the cost allocation plan. So if I spend 2 hours in that situation and I'm 40-40-20, then 40% of that 2 hours would be recorded as Head Start, 40% of that 2 hours would be recorded as early Head Start, and 20% of that 2 hours would then be recorded within the cost objectives or the activities under the child care program. Okay, let's move on a little further here. I'll change the slide. Okay, here we go. Okay, now once we do that and we decide within your procedures, certainly at the end of the period in which the compensation has to be accounted for, then we want to make sure that we provide you with options. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, these are not in stone, they are drafts. So if you decide, and I'm going to explain in just a few minutes, if you decide that the salaried employees, instead of convert their time to percentages, I just want to use hours. That's perfectly okay. But certainly with the non-salaried employees, once that period is ended, we have to then convert their time. Well, it's not convert, but actually add up their time that they spend in each one of those programs or projects, and then record it on the personnel activity report. So the log of activities during the course of the period in which the compensation is going to be accounted for it represents the amount of time that's going to be recorded on the personnel activity report for that program or project. Okay. Then certainly the staff, we want the staff to sign it, and we want the activity to be completed at the conclusion of the payroll period. And once they sign, the employee then will submit it to the supervisor for the next set of signatures. So pretty much after in this particular example, the biggest point is making sure that when we complete the activity report that we looked at earlier based on the consolidated information, that we have records to support that whatever period we're talking about, whether it's a week, whether it's 2 weeks, whether it's once a month, whether it's twice a month, that we have some record to record that time on the personnel activity report that will allow for us to move forward with the compensation. Again, the supervisor should play a role in that process, and we're suggesting that the supervisor will compare the activities recorded on the activity log with the personnel activity reports, because when they sign the activity report, that's really their verification that this particular employee did do the work in those particular programs and projects. So we're encouraging you that perhaps that you may want to consider within your procedures that you allow for a copy of the activity report as well as the log reviewed by the supervisor, so that they can make sure that the time is being properly recorded on that particular report. The supervisor then shall again sign it, saying that they have the first-hand knowledge that the activities performed by that particular employee on the activity report did occur. Now, if the supervisor notes that there are some discrepancies, then of course, within how you handle that within your organization, those discrepancies should be properly addressed, and then proceeding with the signatures before we move forward with the actual processing of those activity reports for payroll. So once all these signatures have been obtained and we've received those signatures and the supervisor has signed it, then of course the payroll process actually begins, and then the activities should then move to the payroll department so it can be processed for payment. This is another very important activity because, again, remember, the activities that we're performing here at payroll is only paying the employee based on the percentage or the number of hours that they have spent in each one of the programs during that particular payroll period. Now, again, the cost allocation plan may say one thing, or the cost allocation plan may say 50-50, I won't say 50-50. The cost allocation plan may say 50, 30, 20. But if the actual activity is based on what they've done during that period, says 40% one program, 40% program 2, and 20% program 3, then that employee will have to be compensated consistent with the actual after-the-fact activities that were performed, even though the cost allocation plan itself says 50% one program, 30%, and 20%. This is important because this is where you may have a difference between the activity reports that are being provided and the cost allocation plan that you've developed for that particular period. I can't get it changed.
You want to take some questions, Terry?
Yes. I'm sorry. I've been talking all the time. Are there any questions?
Not right now, but if anybody wants to, if anybody has any questions, you can go ahead and start typing them in at any time, and we will
be glad to respond.
Be glad to respond. We're hoping if you have your hand raised, we'd actually want for our record for you to type in your question.
Got one?
No question right now.
No question right now. Okay. Is anybody there?
Oh, and that's a good segue. This is Rhonda. Vanessa asked that I reemphasize the fact that we are able to log in to see who is attentive on the webinar, and if you are showing up as non-attentive during the webinar, she will be contacting you so that you can come in and be able to sit through the entire process.
Okay. Now, again, I want to reemphasize my point. These are just draft payroll policies and procedures. The activities that you conduct within your organization may be a little different. So we realize that. But what we're putting out there is a sample here that you can use to kind of make sure that records are consistent. I'm going to talk a little bit. I have a question.
When does this take effect? But that's something we'll
get back.
Okay. We'll respond to that one. Okay. Let's move on here with number 10. It says the time worked in each cost objective program shall be recorded in the general ledger by program. Prior to recording the time, the general ledger, the designated staff shall approve the payroll. Actually, what we're doing here is we're doing a very important task, but we're also performing daily activities. One of the things that all payroll has to be done before it's actually processed, and that entire payroll has to be approved. And the actual timesheet itself is not the approval of the payroll. There should be a designated official in each one of your organizations that approves that payroll to be posted to the general ledger as a charge to the program or project. Now, I want to get back to the general ledger. You notice here we're using the term general ledger because one of the things as a delegate agency, you are required to have an accounting system that meets the standard for the Head Start program. And that simply means that you will have a program which will allow you to post all cash transactions to the general ledger and journal entry all non-cash transactions to your general ledger, as well as use journal entries to correct errors. So now we're at the point of we have a budget set up in our accounting system that says this employee, and I think I remember when I said 50, 30, 20, is now going to actually, the time will actually be posted to the general ledger as 40, 40, 20 because that's the time they actually work doing that particular program or project. So at the end of the day, this will be necessary because you want to make sure that you do not have any situations where you do not go over budget or go under budget, and that's why you have the general ledger as your record or your report to provide that this is the actual activity that has occurred in that particular program or budget. So you're going to need this type of information as a way to track or monitor to make sure that the cost allocation plan is going to be consistent with the actual time being worked in each one of those programs. If you have that particular process, if you have that situation where it's not consistent, then certainly it's going to require you to perhaps go back and look at making changes to your cost allocation plan because the activities that we're performing is not consistent with what we actually doing, which means eventually you could have budget issues somewhere down the road. So you want to make sure, and that's one of the reasons that it's very important that, of course, that the payroll is then recorded in the general ledger because the general ledger is the cornerstone of the accounting system that has to be necessary and in place to manage the grant. Step 11 says prior to the processing, cutting the checks or electronic transfer, the payroll staff shall generate a payroll report by program to verify accuracy of the time recorded in each one of the programs. Now, all we're saying is once it's entered into the system, something like a payroll register be generated, and then that be compared to the payroll, the time records to support that the accuracy of the payroll that's being paid based on what you recorded and based on what's on the activity report, that we have a reconciliation of that time. That's a very important activity in terms of internal controls because even though we may have said that the time will be paid based on the cost allocation plan, the actual may be something else, which then supersedes what's in the cost allocation plan, because we have to pay, as we said earlier, based on that very first standard, that each program or project must pay its fair share of the cost, and only its fair share of the cost of that particular program project or objective. Oops, okay. Okay. The next step is prior to the disbursement of the payroll. You want to make sure that you compare. I can't see it. Payroll records shall be compared to the hours worked in the general ledger. The general ledger, again, is the hub or the backbone of the contract for Head Start and Early Head Start. It should be also for child care. So whatever number of hours that we've aggregated based on all the time records for each program, certainly we want to make sure that the GL, that also is reconciled with the general ledger. And then that the very last step in the process is the disbursement of the payroll, and they give you the following mechanism here to make payroll, either through check, direct deposit, or whatever mechanism that you had in to make the payroll. Good best practice is perhaps even on your pay stub that you provide, that the pay stub perhaps may even identify the source of that particular payroll. So if I'm 40% Head Start and I'm 40% Early Head Start and 20% child care, the pay stub may indicate, based on the dollars from each one of the programs, those percentages. Okay, I think that's pretty much the procedures. So, the questions? Okay.
What we are hoping for as far as when this process will take effect is that everyone will have their policy and procedure written and in place by February the 17th, which gives you 2 weeks. And then the process should begin as far as actually having employees to begin to complete activity logs on March the 1st. They're writing their policy. They have to develop their policy.
I'll revise.
I already completed. We already completed and submitted salary vouchers with corresponding payroll allocation schedules. Do we have to go back and resubmit? The answer is no, you do not. This is going forward. We want to see all agencies implementing the process by March the 1st. Is it possible that we can print out the PowerPoint by our computer? We will post it on the Children's Services website.
And I noticed that there are some errors in it, so we're going to go back and correct some of the errors. This was a draft, so we're going to go back and correct some of those and get it back to them. Thank you.
Is cost allocation applicable in the case where an employee's salary is paid split between program and administration within the same Head Start program?
No, that's a good question. Can they hear me? Okay. No, that's a good question. If you're talking about, what you're talking about is what they call a functional allocation. We're talking about strictly allocation when the allocation occurs between the Head Start program, the Early Head Start program, or the child care program. But every program, each one of those programs have what they call functional allocation. And if you're familiar with Head Start, we have functional allocations for administration, health, nutrition, disabilities. Because that's under that one program, it will not be necessary to allocate costs between administration and program. Now, what should happen is that in the general ledger, in the accounting system, it should be set up for all those employees who are administrators whose salaries are either whole or part administration. So when they work and the payroll system captures it, it automatically charges that salary as an administrative cost.
Can you repeat the deadline, please? The deadline for your agency to draft a policy and procedure is February 17th. Implementation is to begin March 1st. Are you going to provide us with a draft so that we can obtain the language? Yes. Is this a draft or final procedures for the delegates? This is a guide for you to develop your own process and procedure. This is not what we necessarily are saying you must do, not this way. But you do need to have a policy and procedure for your agency that captures all of the same information. Remind people that addendas need to be done to individual management plans.
That's a good question.
Thanks, Lavetta. That's very good information. Yes, we need to remind you that when you add this policy and procedure, you need to make sure that it's included in your management plan.
And I'm not sure how the other process works, but it may require, in some organizations, approval by your policy committee and board. Depends on how your bylaws are in place. So certainly if those are required to be done as part of your amendment to your policies and procedures, you want to follow all the steps.
We'll post it.
When will we post the PowerPoint? It will be posted after the revisions are made by the end of the day. Tomorrow. Do we have to submit the personnel activity reports with our vouchers? Let us get back to you with an answer for that. I don't think that you'll need to submit them with the vouchers, but let us make sure.
What time we got this?
What if you have partners with only Head Start but no other programs, i.e. pre-K? Does the percent example presented still apply? What about Head Start and Title Care?
Well, that's a good question. I'm assuming that is she saying she got child care and Head Start, or just Head Start alone? I need to.
What if you have partners with only Head Start and no other program?
Let me answer that. Let me answer that in two parts. If you have Head Start and no other program, then this activity report is not necessary because you only have one program. However, if you have Head Start and child care and they are not considered to be one program, in other words, they operate on their own set of requirements, then we're talking about a very similar situation where cost allocation would be necessary, which if employees would then share it between those two programs, activity reports would have to be completed by those employees that are shared.
I think you're saying that if they have delegate agency partners, they only fund for Head Start. Provide an example.
Provide an example of the personnel activity report. How would you enter breaks if we are offering Head Start, pre-K, and child care?
Okay. That's a local decision because if breaks, normally breaks don't deduct from your work time. That's inclusive. Now, if you deduct breaks from your work time, then the breaks would have to be deducted proportionally from each one of the programs that the employee is funded to be served in. But normally breaks are just a part of the hours that's worked, and if they're working in that particular program at that time, then that program pays that cost of the program. I mean, the cost of the break.
On slide number 12, are you saying that we need to record the payroll entries in the general ledger before dispersing the payroll check?
That's a good question. I mean, if the general ledger is the source of all the records of the disbursement, certainly it would need to be shown as a disbursement before you actually disperse the check. So you record the disbursement in the payroll register, in the general ledger for cash, and then the checks are dispersed. So it has to be a receipt of cash and it has to be a disbursement. So I'm not going to say they're going to occur at the same time, but they certainly have to be recorded. And whatever you disperse has to be recorded in the general ledger. You may record it afterwards because of the fact that you may have an outside entity, maybe i.e. ADP doing the payroll, and they get that. Once they get that back to you, then you may record it in the payroll register in the general ledger, or it may occur before. That's strictly an organization decision, but it has to be recorded.
Okay, this is a long one. We have assistants that are split funded, but all children in the program are Head Start. Assistants work all day in the Head Start room. How do we document to reflect what is on our cost allocation plan when all services throughout the day benefit all of the Head Start students?
That's a good question. From what I'm hearing, how the children are, what was the question? Can you read that part? First part of it again?
They have assistants that are split funded.
Okay.
But all the children in the program are Head Start.
Okay, good. Okay, that's a different situation. I understand that. In other words, you have one program, which is a Head Start program, but you have multiple funding streams paying for Head Start services. If that is the case, the personnel activity report is not necessary because all the children are in Head Start. Now, if I'm understanding you correctly, there's no other program operating, but I am using funds from another funding source to pay a portion of those assistant salaries. So if all those children are in Head Start and that's not another program operating in that classroom, then what you have in that particular example is that you have multiple funding sources paying the salaries of those employees working in the Head Start program. Therefore, cost allocation will not be necessary.
What part will our partners play in the new policies and procedures?
I don't understand what partners.
I
need a little bit more.
Give me some more information on your question. I'm not sure what you're asking. Is there a guideline for teachers who work full-time in the Head Start collaboration program on how you divide their time between Head Start and child care?
Okay. If that's the case, normally what happens in that case, and these are as far as the personnel activity reports are concerned, this is the easy fix because they don't have discretion to decide on working on one program over another program throughout the course of the day because all the children are in the same programs and they're there with them all day. Normally what happens in that particular case is that their time is recorded based on the activity report based on the percentages in the cost allocation plan. Because teachers don't leave the classroom and go do something that's one program specific or another program specific. Their job is to work directly with those children in the program, whether they're in Head Start or early Head Start, Head Start or child care, which means that the cost allocation percentages in the cost allocation plan would determine their pay in each one of the programs.
Does an employee have to receive a paper stub, or can we provide them access to a portal where they can obtain them themselves?
An agency decision.
Given that this is just a guide, can you clarify what are the requirements that FSS expect us to have in place? What we are saying to you is that you are going to use this guidance and this presentation to develop your agency policy and procedure for recording time and effort. The requirement that FSS has is that you have a way to record and document that information.
In other words, if you have multiple programs such as Head Start, Early Head Start, and Child Care, then certainly you want to make sure that everybody pays their fair share of the cost of whoever the employees that are working in both of those, all three of those programs. So it's a system that we're designing to ensure that those regulations, remember at the start of the presentation, we had a list of regulations that talked about when employees work in multiple programs and projects, that each one of those programs pays their fair share. And so this is a proposed system that will hopefully ensure that we don't have any concerns in the future with monitoring or from the federal government or state agencies that we're not recording the employees' time in each program or project based on the actual time they work in those programs or projects.
In the case of full-day Head Start collaboration classrooms, can 100% of those teachers be charged to Head Start?
I'm thinking when you say collaboration, if Head Start begins and Head Start ends and collaboration begins and collaboration ends, based on my understanding of this, that is two programs, and those two programs have to pay their fair share. So if that's the case, those teachers would have to be allocated between Head Start and the Child Care collaboration, simply because that entire day is not Head Start, and those Child Care funds are not being used as a funding stream under the Head Start program, but as a separate program itself.
Please clarify when Head Start and Child Care is considered one program.
Okay, good question. When Head Start and Child Care is considered one program, it's really a Head Start program that uses Child Care funds as a funding stream under Head Start. So if, let's just say, for example, I had 10 children enrolled, and Head Start funds paid $20,000, the cost of those children was $20,000, and I needed $30,000, and I'm using Child Care funds under Head Start to pay that additional $10,000, then everybody's enrolled in Head Start, and Child Care is only used as a funding stream to cover additional costs. Then that's considered to be a Head Start program using Child Care funds as a funding stream. Therefore, cost allocation would not be necessary because Child Care is not a separate program, but a funding stream under the Head Start program.
Who within FSS will be available to provide timely assistance to delegate agencies? The grantee delegate agency teams will be available to assist. Then do we just use our allocation for vouchering?
I don't understand that question. No, well, I'm going to say no. I'm going to say it's going to be based on the actual after-the-fact activities in each one of those programs. Then you will voucher based on what has been actually performed in each one of those programs or projects during that period.
Is the activity report the basis of how an employee should be paid? If so, does it mean that we will have to do budget revisions more frequently on the Head Start program?
Good question. And the answer to the first part of that question, yes, that will be the basis for which, because remember, it's a activity report after the fact. The employee has worked in the program and they recorded their time in each one of the programs based on that activity report, then the compensation would have to be consistent. Now, hopefully, when you put your budgets together, when you begin to plan your program at the start of the budget period, that you put forth the best effort possible in developing that budget so you can mitigate the need to have to go back and revise the budget to move monies around to cover activities being performed. If that's not the case and you have to, then certainly you have to make budget modifications to account for whatever time it's going to be worked, because they must only be paid out in the program in which the benefit is received.
Will their allocations and costs be the same as the delegate site in which they are under?
That's the partner question.
Okay, will they allocate?
No, not necessarily. No, I would say no. To that one, it would depend on how the work is performed at that partner site versus what's going on in the delegate agency. The delegate agency may be doing, different activities which will require a different set of allocations as opposed to what's going on in the delegate site. So remember now, the whole intent of this process is to make sure that, that the actual activities, regardless of who are the activities occurring, is being charged to each one of the programs or projects. So if there are different activities going on at the contract site versus the delegate, then it may be different in terms of when the cost is being charged based on the personnel activity report.
Head Start, collaboration, and pre-K same children. Do we need to assign cost allocation for all three?
If that whole day is not Head Start, then the answer is yes, because the children can be enrolled in same child can be enrolled in Head Start, in collaboration, and pre-K, and that whole day may not be the entire Head Start program. So if Head Start stops, collaboration picks up, and child care picks up, then certainly that will require cost allocation and will require you to use the personnel activity report for those staff that are being used.
We will work on the sound quality. Sorry, everybody. We'll speak up.
Will more training be available?
Yes, we're going to have some more training. It may come in the subcommittee that's been put together to look at our in-kind, but look out for those dates.
Can DFSS explain whether the Chicago Head Start Collaboration Program is considered one program or two separate programs?
You have costs associated to both programs. There are Head Start charges and child care charges. Your sub-grant agreement is reflective of a collaboration sub-grant agreement. Can you provide some guidelines to follow as far as when to use the allocation plan to determine compensation versus using personnel activity reports?
Compensation will be based on what's being recorded on the personnel activity report if that employee is working in multiple cost objectives. So one is not in lieu of the other. The personnel activity report says that I've spent 40% of my time at Head Start, and that's a separate program from early Head Start and child care. Early Head Start was 40%, and child care was 20%. Then each one of those programs must pay the percentage of cost based on that activity report. So the activity report is not in lieu of another system. It's the system that documents the disbursement of funds from each one of those programs or projects.
When will we also receive the answers to the audience questions, as this might help with a better understanding of the expectations? Yes, we'll pull them together and we'll send them out to everyone.
What should be done by March 1st? By March 1st, you are beginning to implement utilization of your time and activity reports. Will a hands-on training be provided? This is a lot of information to obtain, and how do we know that we are putting together the right policy?
Your PDM staff will get in contact with any of you who are requesting to have additional training on this subject. However, between now and February the 11th, if you need to go over this entire webinar again, it is being recorded, and you can come into the office, our office, at 1615 West Chicago Avenue, make an appointment, and you can sit down and view it again.
I want to make sure I understand. Full-day Head Start funded by other funding education staff would not require an activity report.
Okay. If your program is a Head Start program only, and you're using child care, state pre-K, or whatever funding in Head Start, that means you're only operating one Head Start program for that entire day, not part day and then child care is picking up children in that program, but one Head Start program for that entire period, then the answer is you will not need a personnel activity report because you're a single organization using multiple funds. Now, you will have to track those funds in your budget because those other funding sources may want to know how those costs are being charged to their particular program.
Do we need 3 personnel activities, 1 per program?
No, you don't need. The form that we've shown you will have the opportunity for you to include all 3 programs on that one form. So if you have Head Start and Early Head Start only, then it'll have 2. If you have Head Start, Early Head Start, and Child Care, then it'll have 3. If you have 4 programs, then you can actually go on and adjust it to include 4 programs.
When will we send the questions? As soon as we have a chance to go through them. It won't happen until after the 11th because we're going to have the webinar available for you all that need to come in and hear it again. So it won't happen until after the 11th. Yes, you can. Yes, you can come to 1615 West Chicago Avenue, which is our offices, to view this webinar and its attachments again up until the 11th. After the 11th, then it'll be on an as-needed basis, but it will be open. As long as you make an appointment, you can come in and view the webinar. It will not be uploaded. It won't be uploaded between now and February the 11th. After the 11th, we may upload it to the website, but not before then. So the Head Start collaboration is not separate and only separate with pre-K, so it can be 50-50?
Well, the allocation of the cost is going to be determined by the methodology that you use. So we can't say it's going to be 50-50 or 40-60. You have to develop a cost allocation plan, looking at all the possible methodologies available in that particular area, and then assign the cost to based on the methodology that's most appropriate to what you're trying to do. So you got to still do the cost allocation plan, and the cost allocation plan then tells you what the percentage of cost will be for that program based on the budget. But still, once you start the operation of that program, you're still going to have to record it based on after-the-fact activity.
So this is Lakeisha, everyone. I'm looking at the clock, and in the essence of everyone's time, I see a lot of questions that's left. We will keep these questions up. Victor, will they stay up after we can't disconnect the webinar? Okay. We're going to take all of the remaining questions that we have and provide written answers to them so that we can upload those questions and the answers onto the website for everyone to see. I want to stress the importance of us doing this new policy, this new procedure, as well as while we're invoking this new policy. Most of you know that on the 21st we will have our federal review follow-up. This is an issue that came across everyone basically that's listed in the follow-up, the time and effort documentation. So in order for us to all be compliant and try to stay off the recompete list, we need to make sure we're doing this across the board. And so we're going to post these questions and answers up. If you still have remaining questions, email them back to the email address that you received the registration notice for today's webinar on, which is, Victor, info@childrenserviceschicago.com. info@childrenserviceschicago.com. And we'll provide you with the answers to it in that way. I want to thank all of you, since Victor's put me on the camera now, I want to thank all of you for participating. Know that this is a mandatory webinar, so we will be taking the attendance and ensuring that we have coverage from every agency that we fund, and that you were attentive with our audience view sheet tally. Thank you all and have a good afternoon.